everybody. Sorry for the delay. Good morning. Good to see everybody. Happy impending Christmas coming right up. So hope everybody's had a good, peaceful week. And so glad that we're able to share some time together this morning on Saturday. So I have a little bit different thing I'll do today. I'm actually going to share a video, YouTube video, because hopefully it'll work. And talk about some of the concepts that are brought out there from the video. But what I wanted to talk about today is just the parallels between what's going on inside of us as an individual and what's going on a macro scale in our organizations and society. And just, I find it endlessly useful to think about the parallels between those two. And in a positive, one of the most practical aspects of that is just appreciating how much we are influenced by the society around us, the people around us. But by contrast, also appreciating the opportunity that we have to influence the people around us and influence the society around us. It goes kind of both ways. And really, our opportunity is to build the internal strength and structure in our mind to have a beneficial impact on the society around us, as opposed to being more impinged on by the circumstances around us. How to stabilize and strengthen the most useful parts of our mind for both our own benefit and for the sake of others. So why don't we take a bit of time, as usual, just to settle in and decompress from whatever your day has been like so far, and reboot with a bit of inner peace. So as usual, we can begin by finding a comfortable position, but remember, and I'll close my eyes and so forth, but remember that we can meditate when we're walking, we can meditate when we're lying down, you can slouch on the couch, there's no actual rule. In fact, mixing it up is really helpful, but we're sitting, so we'll sit. So we just begin, and just by finding a comfortable position and becoming aware of our body, we take a deep breath in and out just to reset a bit. And another deep breath in and out, and just invite ourselves to relax. And then another breath, and ask ourselves, what is important now? And we start to become aware of the quiet signals coming from our body, the feelings in our feet and hands, the feeling as we breathe in and out. Maybe there are painful parts, maybe there are comfortable parts, neutral parts. And try to feel the clothes that are on our body, just that sort of generalized feeling everywhere, nowhere in particular, just feeling all over our body at once. We may say that we're feeling the clothing on our body, slightly subtle sensation, but what we're feeling is the body itself. We're feeling the bodily sensation, that experience of touch. And it changes slightly every time we breathe in and out. Just keep a general, broad awareness of the whole feeling of our body. And we can check, are we feeling our feet, legs, butt, torso, chest, hands, face, head? Are we feeling it as it changes with each breath? Then we can think these quiet signals, the quiet messages from our body, they're always with us, no matter what's going on. And they're telling us things, pointing out when we get stressed and trying to give us guidance about how we can navigate our life with well-being, so we can set an intention to regularly come back to this inner experience of the body. Then we can start with a sense of gratitude for the people in our life who've helped us to be where we are today, our parents and people in our society, all of the endless people we don't even know who provide our food and well-being. And we can set an intention to try to repay the kindness of others by improving ourselves for their benefit. And then we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation. So I wanted to share a video that may be an opportunity for reflection. It touches on some themes that I've brought up many times over the course of the program so far. But let's see how well I can do this. So this is the sit back, make yourself some popcorn part of the program. Oops. All right, so this is about the example of starlings flying in murmuration. So murmuration of starlings, but it's about the science behind this. And I'll share the link as well. Um, I think you guys should be able to hear, but tell me if not.
Few things in today's world cause us to pause our technology-driven lives and just look up. But if you noticed a dark cloud darting across the sky, assuming a variety of different shapes and movements, that might just do it. No, you're not tripping on psychedelics. These are real, and the science behind them will blow your mind. These massive aerial stunts are called murmurations, and they're made up of hundreds to hundreds of thousands of tiny birds called starlings. For years, all humans could do is watch in awe as a complete mystery took place above. But with modern technology that can keep up with the birds' activity, we're finally able to answer some of our biggest questions. Like, how do all these birds coordinate with each other? What do their movements have to do with the laws of physics? And why is this dance the key to their survival? Have you ever tried synchronized swimming? Or even choreographed dancing of any type? It's very difficult for humans to move in unison with each other. And for the most part, we're just talking about a few of us, not thousands. So, how do these birds make it look so easy? How do they make it look like they're all part of one single mass? Do they plan and rehearse their patterns beforehand? Until recently, it was hard to say. But now, with high-powered cameras and computers, scientists have been able to make sense of the phenomenon. The first thing they learned is that the flying patterns have more to do with physics than biology. When a murmuration turns in unison, it's similar to what's known as a critical transition. So there, it's all cleared up, right? Okay, for those of you who aren't physicists, a critical transition can be thought of as an abrupt change that occurs when an external force pushes something to its tipping point. Think of it like this. The giant group movements of a murmuration aren't happening because of any communication between the birds. They're a physical reaction. When an external factor, like an incoming predator, causes one bird to move in a certain direction, that bird bumps into the others around him, causing a massive change of course. It's like when an earthquake triggers the same kind of reaction in the snowflakes of an avalanche. Or a strong heat source turns liquid into gas. One bird affects the 7 closest surrounding birds, and each of those birds' movements affects their 7 neighbors, and so on throughout the entire group. This is why a murmuration can appear to have several moving parts, each with a slight variety in speed and direction. But what's the point of it all? Why are all these starlings gathering in one location in the first place? Well, surprisingly, the reasons aren't too different from why humans gather in large groups. For one thing, they like to communicate with each other. Starlings get together to share information, like where to find good feeding sites. The large groups are also helpful for providing much-needed warmth during long winter nights and for defending against predators. Just like most species around the world, starlings find safety in numbers. When predators like peregrine falcons dive in for an attack, they find it much more difficult to target one bird when they're all spinning and turning together. Even the smallest murmurations will have about 200 birds in flight. The larger ones can contain hundreds of thousands. In 1999, there was one cluster recorded that consisted of more than 6 million starlings. Imagine trying to pick your next meal out of that. You're not likely to see one that big anytime soon, but smaller ones are fairly common if you look in the right places. Starlings start to gather in the fall, and they're usually seen in the early evening just before dusk. They tend to rest in places that provide shelter from harsh weather and predators, like cliffs and buildings. If you're ever lucky enough to see one of these in the flesh, keep your phone in your pocket and just enjoy it. Natural majesties like this don't come around every day, and that's why starlings are crazy creatures.
All right. So there's your YouTube video for the morning if you haven't started, but I'll share the link as well. But I wanted to explain a little bit about why I wanted to share that. The example there is what's known as the emergent properties of systems, that you can have very simple things like a starling that just is interacting with its 7 buddies on its left and right. But what happens is at scale, it creates these huge effects. So the behavior of the individual starling is very simple, right? Like my friend goes left, I go, my friend comes from the left, I go to the right. So very simple behaviors. But when you have a lot of these entities moving together, those simple behaviors create huge complex patterns at scale. There's two levels on which this intersects with our personal experience. And that is on the macro scale, what we see with our families and society and organizations and so forth is much more like these flocks of starlings, where people start moving in this direction, moving in that direction. And at least from my point of view, it seems like the human organizations and interactions have become a lot more like liquid compared to like a solid. If you think about that example of, like going from ice to water to gas, with social media and so forth, you can have a movement of an idea that spreads super fast, and mass communications, and you can see behaviors of huge groups of people shifting and moving very, very quickly. But we still tend to think about, things in a very static way, just because from the point of view of what we can hold in our mind, we can't process all of the complexities of what's going on. So we tend to think, okay, this company is like that, and this country is like that, and that group of people is like this, and this political party is like that. And so we tend to clump everything into these pretty static pictures in our mind of like, okay, and then these are these big buckets. And one of the and everybody does this equally. And if you think about it from a political point of view, maybe you're very sympathetic to people who are suffering from racist attitudes, for example. And we understand racist attitudes are just, lumping people into a huge big bucket and treating them as if they all have one quality, which is, of course, ridiculous. It's not at all true. But then what we can do is we can think, oh, this group of people are racists, right? And they always group people in this way. And we sort of clump them into a bucket, So, and in a sense, well, no question, we need to do whatever we can to be anti-racist. At the same time, we need to appreciate that it's hard to lump anybody into a specific bucket because people's attitudes are changing quite quickly, and you need to get to the underlying behavior. So that's on one level. Sociologically, things move very quickly and fluidly, but we tend to lump them in fixed categories. But the other level is that the way our own mind works is we actually have, I always get fuzzy on what the actual number is, but hundreds of billions of neurons, at least hundreds of billions, if not more neurons. And all of the other cells in our body and the cells in our body are pumping out, their own hormones and endocrine secretions and so forth. And all of that is influencing our behavior. And we, in fact, have a huge range of different views on things that are not necessarily harmonious, but we tend to develop this very strong sense of self, like I am just this one person. But what's actually happening inside of us is much more like these murmurations of starlings. We have this, these tendencies that kick up, and they have more or less power on other parts of our mind, and they drive our behavior. And then we develop an idea of who we are, who our self is, based on that behavior. And a nice example to illustrate this is addiction, like the example of addiction. So if somebody has addiction to alcohol, for example, and maybe they just get the whiff of alcohol, and that whiff maybe triggers a little bit of a spark of a memory and some feeling of like, oh, the times we used to drink and stuff. And it actually builds on itself. That little spark can like set off a wildfire. And we can end up getting these very strong cravings. And alcohol is one thing, but we all have cravings for different things in our life, including cravings for status and cravings for, recognition and to be loved and to be with our friends. And so these cravings can take on a life of their own. And so what we have are these very big movements in our mind. They can arise and they can disappear, and they can overpower our willpower. And so we end up in the situation where we do things that we didn't want to do. We do things in spite of ourselves. So we say things, even though part of our mind knows it's foolish. We do things even though part of our mind knows we shouldn't do it. And so we have what we could call self-destructive behaviors. But the problem is when we, all it is just all it is just an inner contradiction. It's not really self-destructive. We don't really have a wish to destroy ourselves in any way. We just have these deeply contradictory wishes. And we spend a lot of our life just trying to mold our wishes and inclinations and try to find a path to happiness in the midst of this ever-changing internal experience where we're attracted to some things, we're repelled by other things, we like certain things. But what in a sense we want is we want this deep and abiding happiness. And so one of there's a lot of things you can draw out of a video like that of the starlings, but one of them is just, it's aesthetically pleasing. It's pretty, it's beautiful. You see these birds moving in unison, and there's an aesthetically pleasing aspect to that because it speaks to harmony, and and there's something very peaceful about that. And there's a sense in which there's an internal experience in our minds that we want, of everything in our mind being sort of harmonious, where our wishes are aligned with what's beneficial for us, is aligned with the things we have a chance to do at work and the things we spend time doing with other people, where everything's kind of aligned and moving in different directions. And so there is a state that psychologists refer to as this flow state. It's started this being discussed in the 80s. As a state of mind where we just feel like we're in the zone. And so for all of us, we probably have activities where we can really get in the zone. One of them for me is if I read a book that I feel is very sort of deep, I can like read a bit of the book, but then it just triggers a thought, and then I can just stay like thinking and playing with that thought for hours. Or, if you play a game, or often people play games because they get into a flow state there, or maybe you like reading or writing or math, or I don't know what you like, but you get into a flow state where it just feels like you just want to keep going because it feels like everything's aligned and everything's harmonious and so forth. And what's happened then is that the inner starlings of our mind have gotten aligned, and they're all kind of flowing together. And they can be very responsive, like the neurons inside our mind, they can be very responsive to the circumstances. We can shift from doing one thing to another thing, but there's still that sense of flow and harmony. And we want that sense of flow and harmony inside, but we also want that sense of flow and harmony outside. And we want to be part of a social group where we're all kind of moving in the same direction. And like it said in the video, we like there's safety in numbers, and we like being part of a group. And we identify with being part of this group or that group. And those affiliations will change over time, but it's deeply satisfying for us to be part of a bigger group where we're all working towards something together. This is a small group, but even this small group, it's nice. We're sort of connecting around some themes that are of common interest. And whatever groups we've aligned with, groups of friends, companies, political parties, religions, whatever, all of these groups, they're where there is some commonality in the culture. And it's actually, I like thinking about culture as being psychology at scale. So we have internal things that we like doing. Psychology is, I like this and I don't like that. But if you group together with a bunch of people who like the same thing and dislike the same things, then you've got culture. At least that's my rough way of using the terms. But the challenge is that culture is changing very quickly, right? And so we're part of, and so we have these culture clashes and movements of culture. And the big one that's been on my mind for most of my life is this sort of clash of science and religions, this sort of glacial crashing together that's been going on for hundreds of years, and are you aligned with science or are you aligned with religion? Where do they all fit in? But they're just cultural movements, right? And people switch allegiances from one group to another. But what's common is that we all like being part of a group. So we are either on the science camp or we're on the religion camp, or maybe we found a way to do both at the same time, which is fantastic, because we get this deep sense of satisfaction. But every church is like a little cultural group. But now we have these, social media is basically liquid culture. It's ideas where a random idea and all of a sudden it's liked by 5 million people. And you see this little micro alignment of people, or micro misalignment, where people give these nasty comments in the social feeds. And so it is at once a fascinating and terrifying time to be alive, because culture is moving really fast. But for me, this analogy of these starlings and what's called, complex phenomena of many things moving together, but these emergent properties, it's been a good analogy for me to contemplate, and the relationship between individual psychology and macro culture. And so when I started off the talk this morning saying we're very influenced by the people around us, but we also have the opportunity to influence the people around us. And whether we're more influenced by those around us in a beneficial way, or whether we provide a beneficial influence, really depends upon the sort of starlings inside our mind. Like, do we have these strong tendencies and habits towards being kind regardless of what the situation is, or strong tendencies and habits towards trying to find alignment instead of finding conflict, right? And so, well, from one point of view, a lot of social debate has shown up these big conflicts, right? There's also ways to move and orient ourselves towards resolving these conflicts by resolving them in our own mind, first of all, and just appreciating that every one of us, and the thing that really helps above everything else for me to resolve these conflicts in our mind, is to stop thinking about ourselves as just one person, right? To kind of see through the illusion of ourself and recognize that actually we're very, very complex creatures on the inside. We're much more like a flock of birds than we are like one monolithic entity. What's Andrew like? Well, he's very focused and he's very distracted at the same time. And he's very kind, but he's also very judgmental. And, there's all these contradictions, and you can't make sense of those if you're thinking of yourself as just one monolithic entity. But if you think of yourself as actually having this amazing internal flow and circulation of all these contradictory views, and we want to give to charity, and we also want money. We want to collect as much money as we can, right? We want to go out of our way to help others, and we don't want to be inconvenienced or put at risk. We have all endless contradictions, and none of those contradictions make us a bad person. What in fact those contradictions are showing is that we're not really who we think we are. We're not really an individual in the sort of monolithic sense that there's just this one caricature, like a cartoon character. We are in fact such complex creatures that we can see ourselves in everybody else. Like, we can see a little bit of ourselves in everybody else. And the people that we judge most harshly, right, we recognize actually there's probably a bit of myself in that person. They and that's just it. Like, we judge somebody for being hoarding all this wealth and just wanting their own personal, private little empire. But we can see in our own way, we also create our own little private safety bubble where we try to bring all the best things and push all the bad things out. And it's just a very natural thing for us all to do. And we look at somebody else and we think, well, they're just jealous and they're resentful. But we think we can find these tendencies towards jealousy and resentfulness in our own mind. But what can align all of these is and give a common. So when you can begin to empathize more with others and begin to see yourself in others and so forth, that's a very interesting shift. But what can give it a direction, what can help to give a coherence and an alignment, is compassion, I would say. And so compassion is a very biased mind. Compassion is a mind that is very biased towards everybody not suffering. That is the particular bias of compassion. Compassion doesn't want people to suffer, doesn't want animals to suffer, doesn't want anybody to suffer. We're very biased against suffering. We're very biased towards happiness. So bias can be perfectly fine, as long as you have a very inclusive bias. So compassion is an incredibly inclusive bias that extends to yourself. May I be free from my problems. May I be free from suffering and difficulty. Extends to your family. May my family be free from their suffering and difficulties. May extends to your friends, your organization, your country, your state. May everybody be free from COVID, the fears of COVID. May everybody be free from the fears of oppression. May everybody be free from being hated by others. May everybody be free. And you can extend so many levels, and that is there is a level of risk and pain and dissatisfaction that every single being is exposed to. And you think about all those starlings, every single one of them is going to die eventually. Every single one of them is exposed to hunger. Every single one of them is exposed to cold and fear. And that is true with all of us. We just happen to have longer lifespans, right? And so there's a sense in which all of us are exposed, and none of us are safe. But there is a kind of safety in numbers. But we want to take the most inclusive picture of try to extend our concern for others to the broadest extent we can, recognizing the commonalities between ourselves and others, and having this one coherent and consistent theme of compassion. And just like we try to solve our own problems, we try to solve the problems of the people around us, or we at least listen to their problems. We're at least empathetic to their problems. And we begin to recognize that if you want to make sense of anybody's behavior, understand that they're just trying to solve a problem. And that even we may deeply disagree. They may be causing problems for us while they're trying to solve their own problems. And so, you can imagine the groups crashing into each other and disharmony and conflict. But from one point of view, we're all being driven by the same underlying stimulus, and that is risk and pain and suffering and loss and so forth. And all these things, they're driving us. Because we're all exposed to the same things, they're driving us all collectively. So we can just keep that in mind as we think about how can we free ourselves from our own suffering, and how can we be a beneficial influence on the people around us, helping them to become free from their suffering and problems. All right, so that was a lot, plus a YouTube video. But what I thought we could do is perhaps just reflect on this. And there were a lot of points coming out of this, but hopefully you can find something that you resonate in here. Perhaps the idea that there's a lot going on inside all of us, and we can see little examples of every person that we know and see around us. We can see little micro examples in our own mind if we look with mindfulness, and that we're not just one thing. That's a central beneficial thought. Okay, so why don't we take a bit of time just to reflect and meditate on this topic, and then we can chat a bit at the end. All right, let me ask a good question. What do you do when you don't understand the actions and apparent greed or cruelty of others? One of my mentors says, if something doesn't make sense, don't try to make sense of it. Like, don't try to find a rational reason. Just appreciate that they are not necessarily, if they seem self-centered and greedy and cruel, they probably are self-centered and greedy and cruel, but that's the problem. When I say it, I say they are, but that's not true. they are not self-centered and greedy and cruel, but they may have strong threads of self-centeredness and strong threads of greed and strong threads of cruelty that influence some of their behaviors. But what's important is to know that the greed and the cruelty and self-centeredness don't influence everything about them. There are examples where, maybe they pet their dog and they're very kind to certain people, and you know even where you see incredibly strong, like rivers of greed and cruelty, even the greed and cruelty are trying to solve a problem. That's them trying to solve their own problem, or maybe the problem of their own friends and so forth, without consideration for other people. But in a sense, they're still being driven. So we can have compassion for them, but understand that they are moving strongly in the wrong direction. So having compassion doesn't mean that you agree with somebody, means I get why you're doing that. And then there's this question of how can you help to redirect? And that's the thing that is so challenging, to try to redirect greed and cruelty. Sometimes you have to, like they say, science proceeds one funeral at a time. Sometimes these things unfold only over generations. You think about the abolition of slavery took multiple generations in the US, and we're still struggling with that. So there are these horrific threads, and but we understand that we're all subject to them. And so we can recognize our own cruelty and our own greed, and our own self-centeredness. Even if they're small, we know they're still there. And yeah, so maybe looking for it inside our own self. All right, so why don't we take a bit of time to just meditate on this. Again, just start by resetting and taking a deep breath in and out. And another breath just to invite ourselves to relax. And then we can think, how central is the idea of me and us and them and you? Everything in our language, everything in our thinking is grouped around these concepts. But every concept is a caricature, it's an exaggeration. There is no me. There is this huge swirling mass of feelings, thoughts, including distasteful ones, greed, cruelty, self-centeredness. We absolutely want to starve those negative tendencies in our mind, but we need to recognize them in our own mind if we want to have any chance of helping others to overcome those tendencies. We can only influence those who are close to us. But if we recognize these harmful tendencies in our own mind, then when we see them in others, we won't panic, we won't judge them. We can help nudge them into taking a more beneficial path. even the most negative minds, they all come from a wish to be free from problems and suffering. They may just be moving in a way that won't really get to that goal. Causing harm and suffering to others will never lead us to the goal of being free from suffering ourselves. And then again, we can reflect with gratitude on all of the kindness that we have received directly or indirectly throughout our lives. And with a wish to repay that kindness, we can develop a wish that through the activities we've done here, this may sow the seeds to move in that direction of us being able to undo problems for others, help protect, benefit others. And then we can open our eyes and arise from the meditation.